For those who are joining in and are not aware of who I am, my name is Noah Legel. I am the founder of and chief instructor of now Illinois Practical Karate. It was Arizona Practical Karate, but I have relocated. I've been making martial arts content online since 2009, I believe. Could have been 2008 even. And I helped my late sensei Richard Pogue develop the Waza Wednesday series on YouTube, which a lot of people followed for several years while we ran that before he passed away, and then even ran a little while after. Beyond that, I've had my own website where I've posted all kinds of different blog posts and articles over time. I've been published in Bugeisha magazine as well. So just kind of been putting out content and trying to get practical karate more to the forefront of the conversation about karate, and kind of change the reputation and perception of the art overall to some degree, because there's a lot of people who have a very specific idea of what karate is, based on effectively children's karate, which is now being taught to adults as well. So there's an understandable misconception about it, but that's why I try and put out the content that I do. That's part of why my late sensei wanted to put out content like that. For my martial arts background specifically, I started training when I was 18 in Shuri-ryu, which is a American style of karate, an eclectic one, so it's kind of a combination of several things. Shortly after starting that, I jumped into Matayoshi Kobudo, Judo, and Shinkage-ryu Iaijutsu, which is a style of Japanese swordsmanship. During that time, I also attended seminars and picked up kata from other styles. It was a lot. I was in the dojo 13, 14 hours a week, usually, and then stack on top of that, training at home. I was obsessed. And then I moved to Arizona. That ended my ability for a while to attend a karate dojo. I kept training in judo because there was one that had a class I could make it to. But karate became something that I trained by myself and did a lot of research on for about 2 years before I found my Shorin-ryu instructor, Richard Pogue. And man, do I wish I'd been able to train with him earlier. And, of course, longer, unfortunately. But Shorin-ryu became my core style. It took a while to shift over from Shuri-ryu. I picked up material from all kinds of different seminars still then as well. He was very big on, yeah, if there's a seminar with somebody good, go learn from them and bring it back. And go cross-train with other schools. Let's invite them over here to spar. It was a lot of fun and a great experience, and developed a lot of experience in the process. I was lucky in that he also had a relatively diverse background with martial arts. So he had trained in kickboxing, he trained in shoot fighting, he trained in Shuri-ryu as well. He trained in Taika Oyata's Ryukyu Kempo and earned a Shodan in that. And then Shorin-ryu became his core style. But he incorporated stuff that he learned along the way. Oh, and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. He incorporated a lot of that stuff. And his focus was on karate that was effective and that you actually pulled from the classical kata, rather than having the three famous pillars, Kihon, Kata, and Kumite, that are essentially very disconnected from each other in modern karate. You've got your kata that you practice to get good at kata. You have your Kihon you practice to get good at Kihon, because they're really not the same as in your kata. And then you've got Kumite, which has nothing to do also with either of those two. Hey, Sensei Jeff. Welcome. I am just giving a bit of an introduction so far. So, yeah, that was basically my instructor's approach, was pull from the kata and do as many different kinds of sparring as possible, do a lot of impact training, and basically try and make it functional. And that kind of became what he was known for as well. I was very lucky in that respect. But since his passing, I've just tried to continue that journey, basically. Rather than, follow in the footsteps of giants, you seek what they sought, right? So that's the idea, and why I have the practical karate approach rather than the typical traditional karate approach, which is not really that traditional, to be honest. Traditional karate didn't exist as a thing before World War II, so it's really not that old. It's really modern karate. You would call it Gendai Budo, a modern martial art. You could call older versions of it Dento Karate, which is more or less old or classical karate. But that still gets into some debates over what counts as that. For me, I try to bring things back to the way that karate was intended to be prior to its modernization by Ito Suanko, who introduced it to the Okinawan school system and created several kata and essentially started the process of simplifying and, to a degree, watering down karate. Of course, that was only a small aspect of that process. Although he may have kicked it off, it getting introduced to mainland Japan by Funakoshi Gichin, who founded Shotokan, took another big leap. His students after World War II really made the transition happen, though. They basically completely dropped all the grappling material. They decided they wanted to have a way to spar, and they didn't like the way the Okinawans were doing it, which was either through kakedameshi, which is like a sticky hand sparring, or they were putting on, basically umpire's gear and going full contact. And they didn't like that, so they decided to model their kumite after the one striking art that they had, which is kendo. Which is where you get that long-range karate sparring, where you shoot in and you hit them once, score a point with a ki and get out. And then they stop the match, right? It's a sword match without swords. That's all that is. And of course, when you take the grappling out of karate, apologies for the siren, when you take the grappling out of karate, all of a sudden the kata don't really make sense, because if you take out grabbing people, you now have to try and make really big leaps to explain what you're doing. So yeah, that's the gist of that process. Is it true you once killed a lion with a karate chop? Oh, are you sure you're not talking about Gogen Yamaguchi? Although I don't believe he had anything to do with I think it was a tiger, actually. But I don't believe that story for 1 minute. That's exactly why Bunkai is lost. So, well, one clarification is that Bunkai technically doesn't mean applications. Bunkai is a process by which you find application, more or less. Oyo would be the word for application, but most people do use bunkai as application these days. And it isn't exactly lost. So there are quite a few schools that do teach application for the kata that doesn't suck. I will say, though, that it's not the majority. The thing about it is, and I've spoken to people who've lived on Okinawa and trained there for decades, and they've had this experience where they've talked to the various masters there and people they've trained with, and they say, oh yeah, I used to know that stuff, but nobody wanted to learn it. After World War II, they had to rebuild, so they needed to make money. If they knew karate, they could teach it, and the GIs wanted to learn it, but the thing was, they wanted to learn what their friends stationed on mainland Japan learned, so they wanted to learn that modern sport version. And the people who were teaching the applications just didn't get as many students, and so they switched. And so a lot of the applications did get lost. But there are lineages and styles where a lot of the application's still there. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. And of course, we'll never know what was original for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't really matter as long as it fits, right? The structures and movements and mechanics of the kata. As long as it fits that, and you can make that connection, then it's good. I like to try and make mine fit classical understanding as much as possible, but sometimes you just got to make your best educated guess. Let's see. Too many people are using bunkai as striking when it was a war art and had grappling. You remove grappling, you remove the majority of bunkai. I'm a big believer that wrestling has 80% of karate bunkai. Well, I can't say I completely disagree. So, yeah, if you remove grappling, which they did, and the big reason for that is, again, I was talking about how karate became popularized through the modern version that was developed primarily through Shotokan on mainland Japan in the university clubs for competitions. And those clubs almost all shared space with the judo clubs. And Funakoshi, when he first went to from Okinawa to mainland Japan, he was friends with Kano Jigoro, the founder of judo, and shared the Kodokan as a training hall. And it would be a little awkward if you were trying to teach grappling in your friend's grappling school. But on top of that, there was a mindset with the Japanese that the Okinawans were kind of a backwater people, and we've already got grappling arts, tons of them. We've got sumo and jiu-jitsu and judo and aikido. Why would we need any of the grappling stuff? Don't worry about that. The hitting stuff we don't have that much of. Let's keep the hitting stuff. That's basically how you lose grappling. And then you get people trying to make up all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, as far as wrestling having 80% of karate bunkai, I wouldn't necessarily put it quite that high, but it's pretty high. There's a lot of grappling involved, and it makes sense. If you look at the kata, count how many times you see somebody pull their hand back to their side. Nowadays, people call that a chamber. That is not what that is. Calling it a chamber basically makes it sound like a firearm, right? You've got a round in the chamber, it's ready to go. That's a children's karate idea. Pull it back here so it's ready to punch. That's not what it's for. The Japanese word for that is hikite, which means pulling hand, and that's what it was for. That's not even a matter of debate. People seem to think that, oh, that's up for debate, or, oh, it's for power. You pull your hand back there to generate power, which is nonsense. I've seen math that I don't understand that explains why that's nonsense, but you can logically understand too. Regardless, that pulling hand, we've got explanations from several Okinawan masters who said what it's for. There's no mystery. And yet people still try to come up with other reasons for it. No, it's meant to grab part of your opponent and pull them. That's what hikite is. Why that got lost, I'm not sure. And then you look at how often that shows up. Half the moves in the kata, more, depending on the kata, have that pulling hand. Well, that means you're grabbing and pulling somebody. Now, maybe you're grabbing and pulling and hitting. Maybe you're grabbing and pulling and wrenching an elbow, or twisting a shoulder, or you grabbed their leg rather than their arm. Maybe you grabbed their head rather than their arm. There's all kinds of things that open up the moment you look at kata from the perspective of being able to grab and hit and lock and strangle and take down. All these things are part of karate. Let's see. To be honest, blessed with a great wrestling coach and learn more about karate from him than anyone. That can absolutely happen. And I think catch wrestling in particular, I think is something that karateka should all learn. It's not just because it's good stuff, which it is, but it's the closest thing that we have in Western society to the tegumi or muto that was practiced on Okinawa. And that's a grappling art that we know they practiced. Again, this was not a mystery. We've got plenty of Okinawan masters who wrote about it. It was a no-gi. They typically stripped down to underwear or shorts. Folk-style submission wrestling was what tegumi or muto was. You could take people down, you could strangle them, you could joint lock them, and you could pin them. That was how you could win. And this was an incredibly common pastime, essentially a standard pastime for the young men at the very least. And Okinawan masters of karate had that experience, had that exposure. They all trained in a grappling art, pretty much without exception, and karate, right? So does karate have groundwork in it? Not much, really. It's just get up for the most part. But they would have trained in an art that did groundwork. And then later on, people started to cross-train in sumo and jujitsu and judo and aikido. All these other grappling arts. That's a long-standing tradition in Okinawan karate. And if you compare arts, the closest thing to tegumi or muto that we have in Western society is catch wrestling. It is a no-gi, folk-style submission grappling method. And it's mean and it's great. It fits into karate very well. So if you are a karate practitioner and you have the opportunity to go do some catch wrestling, you should. It's great fun, and it definitely will help you see more potential within the kata that you practice. Catch wrestling also has pins. It's a fun rule set. Yes, absolutely. I've only managed to do one seminar in person with Coach John Potenza, and that was awesome. But I've followed a variety of different catch wrestlers on various platforms for a long time, seen a lot of what they do, and been able to see a lot of parallels to what my sensei taught me, and stuff that I also just figured out. That's the nice thing, too. When you have kind of a base understanding, it's easier to figure things out for yourself. Of course, it's always going to be easier and faster if somebody just tells you. But you can figure things out for yourself once you reach a certain point in your understanding. So, of course, I trained in judo for 4 years, 2 of that in traditional Kodokan judo, and then 2 of that in Olympic-style judo. There is a difference. There are judo people who will try to convince you there's not a difference, but they are different approaches to judo, for sure. Hey, Paul. Welcome to the Karate Fireside chat. But yeah, that's my recommendation. Jiu-jitsu, like classical jiu-jitsu, has a lot of interesting stuff that you can tie into karate as well. I just find that it doesn't have the same degree of pressure testing anymore. It maybe used to, but doesn't usually anymore. So you've got to kind of adjust the training method, right? You can still take Japanese jiu-jitsu and learn a bunch of great stuff. You just got to train it in a practical way and not necessarily the traditional way. But also it has a bunch of gi stuff in it, and because they were training for a kimono, and I'd rather train the no-gi thing. Pre-2013 judo was deadly, and that's when I was training judo. was before 2013. Then they took leg grabbing out, and yeah, they did some weird things with the rules in judo. Dropped the advantage mark. I can't remember if it was Yuko or Koka that was the advantage marker that they dropped. But yeah, the older approach to judo was better, in my opinion. If you want to see that older approach to judo, check out freestyle judo. They decided to not go the route that the Olympic judo folks did, and they stuck with the older rule set. They also do a lot more groundwork, which, when I was training in the traditional Kodokan judo, it was literally 50% groundwork, 50% stand-up. Every other week, we would be switching. So one week, it would be throws. The next week, it would be groundwork. And then Olympic judo, I think I did like 3 or 4 groundwork classes in 2 years. It was all throws, basically. Leg grabbing was whack, but not adding anything else was the biggest mistake. Yeah. The thing about the leg grabbing is that there are legitimate judo techniques that are based around leg grabs. And why take that out? If you don't want it to be emphasized so much, you adjust the scoring, right? You basically could have just said, it's impossible to win by ippon if you take the opponent down with Marote Gari, which is a double leg takedown, for example, right? You didn't have to just ban them. That was ridiculous to me. And I'd like to see some things added, but that's more on the lines of, like, striking. Let them do some degree of striking, which they already do. So the thing about striking in judo is, traditionally, there are strikes in judo. Not many, but the idea was you throw them down and then you hit them. Or you hit them and then you throw them down. From a functional, practical perspective, that is a good idea, right? But in modern judo, the hits that happen are hidden. It's dirty judo. So what they'll do is they'll grab your gi and then they'll pull enough slack out of it to punch you with it. Or they'll do the same to your ribs, right? And try to use that as part of their kazushi, their off-balancing. It's generally frowned upon. Understand taking out single legs and double legs, but all leg grabs was crazy. Yeah, one of my favorite takedowns is kuchiki daoshi, which is the deadwood drop. It's a knee pick, essentially. And yeah, it's one of my favorites. But you can't do that. You also couldn't do a foot sweep to a leg grab anymore. And that's another one that I'm fond of. Foot sweep their leg all the way up to where you can grab it. But nope. So sometimes the things that sports do are not good. I mean, that's not a surprise coming from me. I do think that being a high-level Olympic sport has watered down judo because its focus has become winning in that rule set. And that's what the majority of people train for, is to win the big important competition, right? The same thing happened, you could argue, with Taekwondo. That got, again, focused entirely on winning in the Olympics. Karate has a similar problem where people train to win the competitions. The problem is the competition has nothing to do with karate, really. If you've been following me here on TikTok, you've seen me do a lot of reactions lately to the bunkai demonstrations that they're doing in competition. There's probably like 5 total kata that they use, and they all use the exact same demonstration of application, which is just all kung fu movie fantasy for the most part. It's all just essentially a gymnastics routine with partners. It's a martial arts themed gymnastics routine, but that's all it is. They're not doing hardly anything functional. There'll be, one technique in the middle of 7 that makes sense. And they add a bunch of stuff that's just not in the kata at all. Why bother, right? If you're just going to do choreography and make stuff up that is completely not in the kata, don't lie and say it's kata application. Just make a division in the competition for choreography. You'll make me less angry by calling it kata application. So, but I digress. The gi 1-inch punch, yeah, kinda, with the judo dirty judo. Did pad work with the judo guy? Think you'd like it. Pad work with a judo guy, interesting. I'm curious as to how that worked. Basically, hitting the pads and then throwing. That would be my thought. And I've done stuff like that. My late sensei had a saying, which it's one of those like almost dumb sayings because it's so obvious, but still somehow or another some people need to hear it. He would say, if you want to be good at hitting things, you have to hit things. And then whenever we'd break out pads, aside from making a tie pad tie joke, he would remind everybody, you're karate people. Hit the pads like karate people. You're not boxers. You're not kickboxers. So why are you trying to box and kickbox, right? So sure, there's fundamental punches and kicks and stuff that are there from boxing or kickboxing. They're close enough anyway, but we've got a bunch of other strikes as well. And like I mentioned earlier, grabbing. So a lot of our pad work included limb control, grabbing, mixing in takedowns, even joint locks during pad work. It was a lot of fun. Hitting, getting into clinch, then throwing, finish with ground and pound. Yep, I've done that. It is a ton of fun. If you are a martial artist who trains in any sort of kind of blended system, so that could be an MMA gym, it could be karate where they actually train classically and mix a bunch of stuff because karate has always been a mix of a bunch of stuff, right? Anything like that where you have striking and grappling combined, you should do pad work that is striking and grappling combined. If you want to be good at doing a thing, you have to do that thing, right? Now, pad work isn't a perfect emulation of doing the thing because, of course, it's not exactly the right targeting. It's not exactly the right distancing. You're hitting their hands, and so they've got to adjust for certain things. But it's hitting stuff as opposed to just practicing it in the air. It's also able to still work targeting and accuracy in the process. It also makes up for the fact that if you're drilling with a partner, you're probably not wanting to hit them full power. You'll run out of training partners if you keep blasting them. But you can hit the pads as hard as you want. And again, you can mix in the grappling components. It doesn't have to just be striking. I still see a lot of gyms and dojos and studios and schools that isolate every component of their training, and they never really put them together except maybe occasionally during sparring. So, they'll break out the pads and they'll do their focus mitts, so they'll do boxing, and they'll just box. They'll break out the Muay Thai pads and they'll do kickboxing, Muay Thai style pad work, right? And, they'll put them on a bag and they'll have them work usually Muay Thai style stuff as well. It'll be a wrecking ball bag, and so they'll do boxing only. Like, they isolate these things and they never combine them. That's not everybody, obviously, but that's a lot of what I see. And to me, that's really limiting your exposure, right? Because you're never actually learning the crossover. And there's a lot of crossover if you want to become a well-rounded martial artist. So you should be mixing those things. And especially for people like me who are classical karateka, That's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a mix of stuff. Love pads because I can shape your own unique style. Yeah, pad work is a lot of fun for the pad holder and the person hitting. It's a chance to explore options and really see when you can put a lot of force into something, when you can't, but also to challenge yourself or be challenged. One of the exercises that a friend of mine, Chris Denwood Sensei, likes to do is holding the pad at just random weird places and angles, and you've got to figure out how to hit it as hard as possible. And that alone is super simple, but it's something that people just don't do. Pads always have to be in the right place at the right time. But suddenly putting the pad at some ridiculous weird angle at a weird height, and you have to figure that out, is a helpful skill, right? If your target suddenly moves weird and is angled funny, you might still need to hit it. And so things like that are interesting little challenges. It's very easy to customize pad work, which makes it a lot of fun. But all that to say, blend your training, please. If you train in something where you're hitting stuff and grappling, put those two things together, and not just in sparring. Do it in sparring, obviously, but not just in sparring. Do it in partner drills, do it in pad work, do it on the bag. Make use of all your skills together as much as you can. Sure, there's definitely a time and place for focused training on specific things. But if you want to be good at blending them, you have to blend them. Honestly, the judo guy reminds me of you. Also, deadly throws. I'll take that. I'll take that as a compliment. My throwing, I've had to make nicer over time. I had a bit of a reputation when I started in my late sensei's Shorin-ryu dojo of throwing people pretty hard. Now, he taught everybody falls, and he taught throws, and we did grappling, and we did randori. So it's not like my fellow students were completely, untrained in such things. But they hadn't spent 2 years training in Olympic judo either. Little bit of a difference. So, and I tended to react that way when people got real close and grabbed me, was I would just go into a throw, which is what happens when you don't blend your training, which I wasn't doing for the first 4 years of my martial arts experience. I was training in a bunch of things and just never putting them together. And so, yeah, anytime somebody grabbed me, I switched into judo mode. So it took a while of training with my late sensei to actually blend everything together. Weirdly, I got better at judo when I stopped doing judo and started training with him, which I know seems backwards, but one of the things that we did was the sticky hand sparring, right? Which is very focused on developing tactile sensitivity, being able to stay connected to your opponent and feel where they are, how they're moving, how much force they're giving you, that kind of thing. That becomes incredibly helpful when you're grappling. And I find that, especially in Olympic judo, there wasn't a lot of sensitivity training involved when I was doing it. The emphasis was on full power, full commitment, maximum effort, which is, by the way, completely the antithesis of Kano's idea of judo. Kano had 2 foundational principles for judo: maximum efficiency, minimum effort, and mutual benefit. The mutual benefit you could make the argument for still, but the maximum efficiency, minimum effort is gone in Olympic judo. It is maximum effort. If you start a throw, you are supposed to commit fully to that throw Even if it's not working, dive until it does, basically. And that's why, if you look at Olympic judo, there's people like slamming their own head on the mat trying to throw their partner. And that's also why, instead of falling correctly, they'll flip funny in the air and hurt themselves, because if you land on your back, you lose. So, but I digress, right? With that emphasis, why would you learn sensitivity if you're just going to use every ounce of strength you have to do the technique regardless? Why would you need to pay attention to how they're moving? There are some people out there who still do. And there's also moments where they do, even if that's not necessarily their main approach. But shifting my training methodologies, and of course Kakedameshi mixed striking and grappling methods, that helped too. But it was funny because I did a judo scrimmage with some freestyle judo folks and BJJ folks. I did way better at that than I ever did in any of my judo competitions when I was doing judo. And it was basically just because I counter threw everybody, because I could tell how they were moving. Worked out really well. Olympic judo teaches you to overthrow, which is only really good on soft mats. Yeah. Oh yeah. My judo coaches in Arizona for Olympic judo were Olympic alternates. And oh boy, when I first came to the club, right, they wanted to see what I knew. Because I was like, I've trained in judo for 2 years, traditional Kodokan judo. And they're like, okay, well, how we do things is a little different than the traditional way. Let's see. And they started quizzing me. They started naming throws and having me do them. And I had learned a lot of throws. Could I do them on a fully resisting person at that time? No, I could not. But I could demonstrate, like I understood mechanically, fundamentally, how the throws worked and how to do them. And I demonstrated just throw after throw after throw. I don't know if I got through all the Gokyo, but I got through a lot of them. And they were like, well, you've basically got the entire brown belt curriculum of throws down, from a traditional sense. Now we've got to make it work for the way we do it. And whoo boy, it was a shift, that's for sure. And in traditional judo, your goal with throwing your partner, you were supposed to try to stay standing up when you threw them, which from a self-defense perspective also makes sense. If you throw somebody, you don't also want to fall with them. Being on the ground is not where you should be if your goal is to run away. It makes it harder. So, from a traditional sense, yeah, you want to throw them and remain standing. Well, again, that means you can't fully commit to some things. If it's not working, you've got to switch to something else. It doesn't work in Olympic judo. You're supposed to just go. The biggest difference I remember was uchimata, the inner thigh throw. And when I learned it in traditional judo, it was basically like almost like a hip throw, essentially, where you only get your hip halfway across their body and then you sweep the leg. But in Olympic judo, they had me, we'll use legs here, right? Instead of staying in front of them and sweeping the leg, I was supposed to plant my foot behind them, between their legs, behind them, and then shoot my other foot back to where that was and flip. That was the throw for uchimata. And if you watch uchimata in the Olympics, that's how they do it. They basically immediately dive into a flip, which great if you're trying to make your opponent land on their back so that you can win a judo match. Not great if you don't have mats or, don't want to end up on the ground for a variety of reasons. So, I can't say that training in Olympic judo was bad because it definitely gave a real sense of how it is to grapple people who are good at grappling, right? Standing, at the very least. Like I said, in Olympic judo, I think I did maybe 3 classes of groundwork. The rest was all throws. So couldn't speak to the groundwork part. I did a lot more groundwork with my karate instructor than I did in Olympic judo. And he trained in classical Japanese jiu-jitsu, as well as his shoot fighting experience. So his approach to grappling was a little different. Funny thing with that, he hated grappling and still taught it. And he'd tell you, I don't like it, but it's important. You need to know how to grapple. You can't just ignore an entire facet of fighting if you want to be able to defend yourself. You don't get to decide where the fight happens. At least the vast majority of the time you don't. Now, that 98% of fights go to the ground statistic is just complete nonsense for the vast majority of people, because that statistic comes from LAPD arrest statistics, not self-defense statistics. And of course, if you are an LAPD officer, your goal is to arrest somebody, which probably includes putting them on the ground so you can handcuff them. So 98% of fights going to the ground makes sense in that context. I've only seen meta-analysis of self-defense situations where they go to the ground, and it seems to be more about 50%, give or take, depending on the analysis you're looking at. And 50% makes sense to me, right? If you consider the fact that fighting is generally made up of 2 unarmed methods, striking and grappling, for it to be about 50% of each makes sense. So it's still important. I don't say that 50% number as a way to say that means you don't need to know grappling by any stretch of the imagination. But the 98% of fights going to the ground statistic is not appropriate for self-defense situations and makes it seem like you only need grappling, which is why the jiu-jitsu schools use it. It's a false correlation, but that's why they use that statistic. Again, not trying to say you shouldn't learn to grapple. It's important. If it's half of potential fighting situations, that's a big deal, right? And like we've discussed already, karate is a combination of grappling and striking. It's not really a striking art in the modern sense, right? You think of striking arts as boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai. It's not like that. There's too much grabbing and twisting joints around and trying to knock the other person down for it to be considered a striking art. It's a blended art, and always has been until World War II, which, you know, that made for a lot of changes in the world. But I know I've kind of rambled about that. I'm not sure how much time I've still got. I've got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if anybody's got any questions or comments or anything they'd like me to discuss, but otherwise I just keep rambling is usually how this goes. But all that to say, I think a lot of people don't really understand how the specialization of martial arts happens, and then the cause and effect situation with that, right? Essentially, martial arts, pretty much all, stemmed originally from having to fight the people next door. You wanted their land, you wanted their food, you wanted their people, whatever the case was, there was a fight that had to happen, right? And that would have been a situation before there were laws to consider. So anything goes. Well, that's going to be striking, it's going to be grappling, it's going to be weapons, it's going to be every dirty trick in the book, right? And then over time, as society progresses, we start to develop rules about things. Sometimes they're social rules. They're not something that's written in stone, but for example, there's a social rule in most Western countries that if you get into a fist fight with somebody over something, a social fight, right? There's a general expectation that you're not going to kick each other in the balls. That's just sort of a societal norm. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that's sort of the expectation, right? So we develop these societal expectations initially, and then we develop rules. And then we get into sports because, well, we got these people who are really good at this physical thing. We want to see who's the best at it, so we develop sports. Well, in order to determine who's the best, you start to refine that rule set more and more and more until you end up with a very, very specialized system of fighting. So you go from, for example, Pankration, which was the original, MMA of Greece, that split into boxing and wrestling. And that sort of split happened all over the world with martial arts. And they got super specialized. And like I was talking about earlier, the methods got separated, right? So people weren't combining their striking with their grappling anymore. Those were two separate things. And then now we're having, thanks to MMA, this circling back of putting things back together. I don't think everybody puts them back together very well, but it is an ongoing process. Although 70% of fights don't go to the ground, almost 100% of fights will get into a standing clinch. Yes. Some sort of standing entanglement. Absolutely. I can't say 100% because there's always the, one shot drops them situations or they try to box each other. But yes, the vast majority of unsanctioned fighting and self-defense situations often end in some sort of standing clinch work, which is why that kakedemeshi, the sticky hand sparring, is so helpful, because it's a sort of sparring where you are forced to stay at that range, and it can be clinch sparring, but it has a little more range than clinch sparring typically does. You can get out to arm's length, but that's about it. And clinch sparring, kakedemeshi, mix that in with long-range sparring, grappling-focused sparring, MMA-style sparring. You have to get exposure to all these realms of combat, right? And knowing that although the majority of fights probably don't go to the ground, about half do, with the vast majority ending up with you entangled in some way, standing up, knowing how to grapple becomes really important there too. I can't tell you the number of traditional martial artists who have this stupid anti-grappling idea. The only anti-grappling is grappling. I've come across this so many times with the I've got anti-grappling techniques. If somebody tries to grapple me, I'll do X, Y, Z. And it's pretty much always, I'll stick a thumb in their eye, I'll hit them in the throat, I'll hit them in the groin, stuff like that. I'll hit them in the back of the neck when they shoot for a double. I'll knee them in the face when they shoot for a takedown. It's trying to come up with non-grappling ways to stop grappling, and it's just ridiculous. Can you stop somebody who's trying to grapple you with non-grappling methods? It can happen, yeah, but I wouldn't rely on that. You need to know how to stop grappling with grappling, because that's the best way to do so. People just use that as an excuse to not learn grappling, and it drives me insane. Anti-grappling is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I hear it at every local karate dojo. Thankfully, I didn't hear it at mine. The newer version of American Kempo has added grappling. Good. I actually have sparred an American Kempo guy who was fantastic, just all around. He And this was probably, I don't know, 2011, 2012. So been a good bit, but yeah, he was very well-rounded at the time. But yeah, the anti-grappling thing is just an excuse to not learn grappling. I have actually told people before who've said that stuff, like, oh, I'll do these anti-grappling whatevers. I've told them to go ahead and do it. We will spar. I will try to mostly grapple you, and you can go ahead and do those things to me. You can try. It doesn't work. I will allow them to poke me in the eyes, hit me in the throat, hit me in the groin, grab my ears, fish hook, whatever it was, bite me. It doesn't work if you don't have a fundamental understanding of grappling. Now, can you add those things to grappling and make it easier? Yes, but you have to know the fundamentals of grappling. It's nonsense to think that you just can magically stop somebody who knows what they're doing. Best statement ever, try it. Yeah, I was at a seminar once it was sort of a training camp weekend where a bunch of different people got together and taught different sessions. It was great fun. But one guy there, the only defense to a rear naked choke he'd ever learned was, tuck your chin in and bite their arm. And I told him, that's not going to work. You're going to get your jaw broken. And he's like, no, it has to work, right? That, bite him. And I said, I will put you in a rear naked choke right now, and you can bite me as hard as you want. Just tap out when you need to. And he tapped out. I had some teeth marks in my arm, but he didn't break the skin before he had to tap. His jaw would have been broken. If I had somebody as well who got mad that I kept taking them down in sparring, and they didn't have any fundamental grappling, and so they were making the excuse that, oh, well, I can't use my anti-grappling because it's too dangerous. And I'm like, go ahead. Go for it. The thing is, if you can't escape a bad situation using fundamental mechanics, and if you can't get to a superior position, it's not going to help you. Right? If I can put you in kesagatame, the scarf hold, probably the most basic pin you learn in judo. If I can put you in that successfully, and you don't know how to get out of it, you are not going to be able to eye gouge or bite your way out of it, which I have proven on a couple of occasions to people. Anti-grappling is not a thing. You just have to learn how to grapple. Now, do you need to be able to beat a BJJ black belt or a Division I wrestler? No, you don't. Unless you're trying to compete against them. That's a different story. But for self-defense purposes, absolutely not. Your average thug or, drunk uncle at a party, no. You need to know the fundamentals of grappling. But you don't need to be, an expert at it. You should be a jack of all trades, master of none, beginner at nothing, basically, if you want to be prepared for self-defense. And if you train long enough, you'll find things that are, more suited to you, and you'll kind of lean into those. But you need to have that exposure. Anti-grappling is just grappling. Crazy concept. I know, right? Throws people off all the time. But with that, I'm going to close this one out. My time here is up. So I appreciate everybody jumping in. Sensei Jeff for throwing all those comments down there for me. That helped out a lot because it gave me stuff to talk about. If anybody has topics for future lives, send them my way as well. But again, appreciate everybody, and we'll see you later.